Number 9. Bendera Ford. Back in 2010, a futuristic-looking flying saucer-like Ford was spotted in a Wendy's parking lot in Ohio. Intrigued bystanders set out to learn the story behind it and discovered a Car and Driver article from 1998 profiling the unique vehicle's builder, John Bender. He built the so-called Bendera Ford and another like it over a 3-year period during the 90s. At the time the article was published, Bender was 68 years old. He was a retired mechanic and electrician who had always aspired to design his own car. Bender finally brought his vision to fruition with his 2 unique Bendera Fords. The Car and Driver article describes the vehicle as a 4-passenger mid-engined coupe with gull-wing doors and a Ford Pinto suspension. The car is only 42 inches tall and sits low to the ground. One of the Bendera Fords was white while the other was gold. While it's unclear what happened to the cars, this image of what looks like an abandoned Bendera Ford suggests that at least one of them was deserted and forgotten about at some point in time. Photos of the vehicle that were captured from the Wendy's parking lot in 2010 show that it was visibly aging on both the inside and out. This gives the space-age car an ironically outdated look and serves as a reminder that it wasn't something from the future. Number 8. The American Dream. In 1986, a newly built vehicle called the American Dream shot to fame as the new Guinness World Record holder for the world's longest limousine. At just over 100 feet long, it contains a waterbed, a swimming pool, a jacuzzi, a putting green, a helipad, a refrigerator, a phone, and more. The 25,000-pound vehicle can be driven from both ends and can accommodate up to 75 passengers. Its original builder, custom car designer Jay Orberg, based its design on the 1976 Cadillac Eldorado limousine. He equipped each end with a pair of 8-cylinder engines and installed a hinge in the middle of the extra-long vehicle so it could turn corners. The American Dream experienced a brief period of fame during which it was frequently rented out for appearances in movies and at major events. However, its popularity was short-lived. Not only did the excitement seem to wear off, the limo was difficult to park and was inconvenient in several other ways due to its size. It stopped receiving regular maintenance and started to rust as it sat in storage, neglected and forgotten. The American Dream got a second chance at life thanks to a man named Michael Manning, who owns an automotive teaching museum in Long Island, New York called the Auto Soem. When he first saw the car years after it was last used, he described it as graffiti-covered garbage with flat tires, broken windows, and parts that had deteriorated far beyond repair. Manning nevertheless fell in love with the vehicle and set his sights on restoring it. Unfortunately, he ran into some funding issues after acquiring the car, and it sat for several more years before he decided to sell it on eBay. Florida-based tourist attraction owner Michael Deezer bought it and had it shipped to Orlando. Determined to bring the car back to life, he sought help from Manning, several other experts, and some auto body repair students. 3 years and more than $250,000 later, the limo has finally been restored to its former glory. Number 7. Herkimer Jitney. A triple-axle, 6-wheeled vehicle called the Herkimer Battle Jitney appeared for just a few minutes during the 1999 fictional film Mystery Men. In the scene, it was acquired by a group of superheroes who were on a quest to save a city from apocalyptic destruction. The Jitney had a shockingly realistic look, perhaps because the scene was filmed using a real custom-built vehicle. It was made using a combination of running gear from a 1979 Ford semi-truck with the body removed, and a modified Airstream camper was put in its place. People loved it, but because of its uniqueness to the Mystery Men movie, the Herkimer Battle Jitney couldn't be used in other films. As a result, it was parked at a storage yard in California and left to decay. Fans tried persuading the vehicle's owner to restore it, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Mark Zorin, who owns Razorfly Studios in North Carolina, specializes in recreating movie and television props. He checked his email while taking a shower one day and saw that the Jitney was up for sale. Zorin was third in line to buy it, so in hopes that he would gain priority in the sale, he explained to the seller that he planned to use his expertise to restore the vehicle to its former glory. It worked, and after agreeing to buy the Jitney without seeing it in person first, it was delivered to Zorin a few days later. He described it as being made with steel that was thin enough to form by hand and said that the roof wasn't designed to bear any weight. Some of the Jitney's accessories were gone and its rear end had been dramatically altered. In other words, Zorin had his work cut out for him, but he remains optimistic about the project, which is ongoing. Late last year, he told the classic car website Hemmings that his team was still working to track down some parts, but that they'll make their own if they don't find what they need. His company specializes in both 3D printing as well as hand building and sculpting, so one way or another, they will make it happen. They hope to finish the restoration for the movie's 25th anniversary in 2024. Number 6. Bus Garage Number 7. In a residential area on the outskirts of Kyiv, there's a UFO-shaped Soviet-era structure that goes by the much less unique name of Bus Garage Number 7. It's filled with colorful, rusting Volvo buses from a bygone period when the station was bustling with activity. In 2019, a former staff member told CNN Travel that construction began in 1973. It took 8 years to build the space-age looking station, and that it was the most beautiful bus park in Ukraine and Europe at the time. The former employee went on to say that the station serviced various international routes, including to and from Moldova, Czechoslovakia, Germany, and Poland. The building's roof was suspended by 180 steel cables, which were attached to a column in the center. During the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster in 1986, more than 70 buses were dispatched from the station to evacuate residents from the city of Pripyat. Some of the buses never returned because they absorbed too much radiation to continue operating safely, according to a former worker who spoke with CNN. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, all international bus routes from the station were canceled. Activity increased even more when Ukraine descended into a financial crisis that lasted for years to come. There was no money to replace aging buses, and in 2005, domestic routes were canceled. However, it wouldn't be until 2015 when the station officially closed its doors. Today, the effects of time and neglect are evident as the station falls further into disrepair and plants grow out of the roof and pavement. Number 5. Turbojet train. The Cold War was marked by an obsessive competition between the United States and the Soviet Union for technological and military supremacy. As part of their relentless need to one-up the other, both superpowers developed experimental jet-powered high-speed trains. American railroad engineer Don Wetzel designed the first of these vehicles during the mid-1960s. In addition to the desire to supersede any similar technology that might have been underway in the Soviet Union, the goal was to create a faster, safer, and less expensive train than anything in existence at the time. The M497 train, nicknamed the Black Beetle, was equipped with two 5,000 horsepower engines. It reached a record-breaking speed of 183 miles per hour and remains the fastest ever locomotive in the US to this day. The Soviets built their own jet-powered train during the 70s, and while it wasn't quite as fast as the Black Beetle, it was impressive in its own right. It had the ability to quickly reach speeds of up to 160 miles per hour, but it used a lot of fuel and never went past the prototype stage. Only 2 of the locomotives were ever built, and instead of being put to use, they were parked and forgotten about. Photos of a light blue locomotive surfaced in 2016 after a Russian photographer discovered it sitting in the exact spot where it was left decades ago. Today, it stands as a symbol of a time when the paranoia between two nations came terrifyingly close to nuclear war. Would you rather own a vintage bus or a vintage limousine? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 4. MAZ 7904. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union developed numerous heavy-duty trucks and tractors called MAZ vehicles. They were designed to carry military materials of all kinds, including the USSR's growing collection of nuclear missiles. One vehicle, known as the MAZ 7904, was equipped with 6 axles and 12 huge wheels, each measuring 9 feet in diameter. It was capable of carrying loads weighing up to 220 tons, but the chassis alone weighed 140 tons. The design it required was complicated, and over 100 experts were commissioned to ensure that it would work. They only performed tests at night and at times when there were no Western satellites looming in the sky above them. The more than 105-foot-long, 22-foot-wide machine was finally rolled out in June of 1983. However, the vehicle soon proved to be problematic and impractical. It was so heavy that it only had a maximum speed of just 16 miles per hour. It also handled poorly and was parked at a hangar in Kazakhstan, where it was forgotten about. In 2010, what was left of the MAZ 7904 was scrapped, and today it lives on only in photos. Number 3. Cape Schmidt Soviet Base. Located in Siberia's northernmost region, the former Soviet air base at Cape Schmidt is filled with neglected and snow-covered military buildings and vehicles. Formerly known as Cape North, it was established in 1954. The base was nearly entirely abandoned when the Cold War ended during the 90s and has functioned mainly as a municipal airport ever since. Russia began to re-establish its military presence at Cape Schmidt in recent years, but according to the latest updates, the site still looks dilapidated and messy more than anything else. Photos captured by photographer Andrei Shaprin in late 2015 show an array of decaying ships and airplanes that were still sitting outside the base at the time. Shaprin stayed at the base for 3 weeks as he was trying to follow migrating polar bears. He unfortunately missed the animals, but spent his time there snapping rare photos of the desolate base. The Russian government's plans for the base's future remain unclear, although it seems like the military has continued to expand its presence. Number 2. Smirnik Air Base. Built during the early 20th century near the town of Smyrnik on Sakhalin Island in Russia's far east, the site that eventually became Smyrnik Air Base originally served the Imperial Japanese Army and was known as Keton. When the Soviet Union regained control over Sakhalin Island after World War II, Smyrnik Airfield became a base for the 528th Fighter Aviation Regiment. It was tasked with defending the island's air and marine territory. It also functioned as a watering and coaling station for the Sakhalin Railway. During the 1960s, an 8,200-foot runway was constructed at the base. The military also built a fan-shaped arrangement of reinforced concrete shelters for housing aircraft, along with gravel taxiways and 20 aircraft parking lots. Western intelligence first learned of the site in 1962, and within a decade of the discovery, the base was home to over a dozen Yak-28 interceptors. Smyrnik also came to house a MiG-23 Receptor regiment by the 1980s. Today, the airfield is no longer in use, and its runways haven't been maintained in decades. Its overgrown remnants remain, along with 3 decaying aircraft that are no longer airworthy. Number 1. Handley Page Victor. During the early stages of the Cold War, a strategic bomber called the Handley Page Victor was developed for the British Royal Air Force. It entered into service in 1958 and was initially praised for its ability to fly higher, further, and faster than previous models, while also carrying a heavier payload. Just 10 years later, RAF officials decided that the Handley Page Victor had failed to fulfill the military's readiness to respond to the Soviet Union's advancing nuclear missile technology. The aircraft simply wasn't designed to cope with low-level activity and had a tendency to form stress fractures in the environment where it was needed. It was repurposed as an aerial tanker and did very well at its new job until it was officially retired in October of 1993. One of the jets sat for years outside the RAF Marham base in Norfolk, England. In 2020, base officials offered it to anyone who was willing to come and remove it from the property. Their hope was that someone with the ability and desire to restore the plane would take them up on the opportunity. However, nobody did, leaving the military with no choice other than to dispose of the Victor, a move that a spokesperson described as a difficult decision.
8. The submerged archaeological park of Baia, Italy. In the Gulf of Naples in Italy, you can step, or rather dive back in time to the height of the Roman Empire and see what was formerly one of the go-to resorts for rich and influential Romans. The Roman city of Baia was a party paradise, not unlike how many see places like Ibiza today. The historian Seneca noted that there was as much music being played as there were drunk people, and parties were held on boats and villas. It seemed like whatever happened in Baia stayed in Baia. The reason that Baia is now a diving rather than a party hotspot is due to a rather curious phenomenon known as bradyseism. It's a seismic occurrence much like earthquakes. However, while earthquakes occur horizontally, bradyseism happens at a vertical angle, moving the earth up and down. During one of these events, Baia ended up falling under the waves. There are 5 sites of the diving location for you to explore, each one offering a different insight into the Roman city. At Ninfeo di Claudio, you can swim across a paved road and enjoy sights of the foundations of the steam baths and replicas of the elegant statues of the Nymphaeum where Emperor Claudius liked to hang out. Villa a Protiro is one of the most popular spots. The ruins of this old villa have a stunning black and white mosaic floor, which would have once been part of the building's courtyard. Although these are the most notable locations, make sure that if you visit, your guide takes you to see everything this piece of history has to offer. 7. Versenbai Car Piles, Curacao. If you like vintage motors and scuba diving, then the Versenbai Car Piles in Curacao are a must-see. An entire barge of 1950s vehicles were taken out into the water off of Versenbai Beach and sunk at the start of the 1970s in order to create an artificial reef to promote the recovery of marine life. It seemed to do a good job because as you dive down to the many cars and trucks scattered on the seabed, you'll see plenty of coral making its home on the vehicle's chassis. You might even spot a moray eel poking out from one of the headlights. One of the top attractions for the divers here is a wreck of a pickup truck which is in great condition, positioned at a horizontal angle into the seafloor. In the back of the truck, its cargo now is a shed load of coral, with fish weaving through it. The cars start to appear once you're roughly 45 feet under the water and continue to emerge the deeper down you swim, so divers need to be aware not to get too carried away. 6. Million Dollar Point, Vanuatu. Million Dollar Point is located on the island of Espiritu Santo in Vanuatu. The dive site is unique not only in its name, but also in what you can find there. To find out how this diving location got its name, we need to rewind to World War II, when the US Army had a base on the island. Located in the Pacific Ocean, it was a perfect place to attack the Japanese forces. As a result, the US fortified the base by creating roads, buildings, and airfields. Although the US was using it as a base of operations, Vanuatu was in fact a territory that was controlled by Britain and France, and at the time was referred to as the condominium of the New Hebrides. We don't know about you, but Vanuatu is much easier to say. As the war came to a close, the Americans needed to figure out what to do with all their stuff. Without plans to take it with them, they needed to find new owners for things such as furniture, clothing, cars, and all their food and drink stores. The best customers for this would be the government of Vanuatu. However, the governing bodies of the country were Britain and France. They thought that they could get an even better price than the rock-bottom offer the US gave them, or perhaps if they waited long enough, they'd get it for free. The Americans were having none of this and came up with another plan. They gathered all of the items together at a port on the south of the island, got some bulldozers, and then pushed it all into the sea. The bulldozers followed too. All in all, millions of dollars worth of possessions went into the water, thus why the dive site is named $1 Million Point. Aside from what the locals managed to salvage at the time, divers can make their way through a labyrinth of rusting vehicles, cranes, and the odd Coca-Cola bottle or two. 5. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. In 1986, Kiichiro Arataki discovered the location of the site, although Yonaguni had already become a renowned scuba diving location for Japanese divers looking to view the hammerhead sharks that called the area home in the 1980s. Aratake was looking for new shark hotspots in order to offer tours to fellow divers when he came across a monument towering out of the seabed. Due to its shape, he nicknamed it the Underwater Machu Picchu. Today, locals and visitors call it Kaite Iseki, which means the monument at the bottom of the sea. This is where the debate as to the origin of the site came into play. Many scientists and other academics began to theorize whether this discovery was a natural formation or in fact whether it had been constructed by a long-lost civilization. There's a lot to debate as to whether the site is actually part of the lost continent of Mu, considered by many to be the Atlantis of the Pacific Ocean. In fact, there's been a lot of research done to put stock behind the idea that it is a man-made structure. Masaki Kimura, a professor of marine geology and seismology, has concluded that the 85-tall monument is made of mudstone and sandstone. Not only that, but at the site they found evidence of human habitation, including stone tools for farming, evidence of roads, stone tablets, and even a carved face that bears a resemblance to those found on Easter Island. However, other researchers believe that the site is natural in a sense, as the rocks it's made from can stack in formations such as this. Many don't dispute that humans may have lived there, concluding that the civilization would just have made a few small renovations to the existing natural structure in order to make it habitable. Do you think this monument is a product of ancient engineering or a natural wonder? Let us know what you think it is in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more interesting videos. 4. SS Yongala, Australia. On March 23, 1911, the steamship the SS Yongala was sailing through the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. However, the conditions were stormy and a cyclone picked up that led the Yongala to sink beneath the waves. 122 people would lose their lives in the sudden capsizing of the vessel, with many not knowing what might have caused this event to occur so quickly. The ship would go undiscovered for almost 5 decades until it was rediscovered in 1958. Now, the Yongala sits on its side at a depth of 45 feet at the top of the boat and 90 feet to the bottom where it hits the sand of the seabed. Due to the nature in which it capsized, it's one of the most intact vessels in Australian waters, despite the fact that it's over 110 years old. Thanks to the location in which it capsized, the SS Yongala is now a haven for marine life. The entire vessel is encrusted in colorful coral, and many different aquatic species make their home amongst the metal frame. Various rays, sea snakes, barracuda, turtles, and even bull sharks can be found around the wreck. 3. The SS Thistlegorn, the Red Sea. On October 6, 1941, the SS Thistlegorn was preparing to sail through the Suez Canal in Egypt and had stopped to wait until the all-clear to proceed at Shag Rock. The Thistlegorm, complete with her cargo of tanks, planes, and other armored vehicles, was struck by 2 long-range bombs from a German vessel. The bombs punched a hole in the port side of the ship, which might have been salvageable. However, they also penetrated through to the storage for the tank ammunition on board, which exploded so violently that the ship split in 2 pieces. Due to the gravity of the blast, the Thistlegorm did not take long to sink beneath the waves. Thankfully, only 9 crew members lost their lives, with the rest making it safely off of the ship. SS Thistlegorm would sit at the bottom of the Red Sea until it was found by Jacques Cousteau in 1956, 15 years after its demise. From just one man rediscovering it, the ship's wreck now has countless divers visiting it every year, making it one of the most popular diving locations in the world. The traffic through the vessel can get so busy that it can even create air pockets in some areas of the ship. It's easy to see why many people are fascinated with the Thistlegorm. Not only does it have a connection to World War II, but it's a treasure trove of artifacts. Aside from those lost in the catastrophic blast back in 1941, there's plenty for you to discover, and a lot of it remains in remarkable condition. Bedford trucks and jeeps remain parked up in the hold, and many of them still have their glass windows and tires still in one piece. Fish swim about stationary motorbikes, and those that feel more adventurous can head to see the bombs, rifles, and ammo stored away in some of the holds. If you wish to see the grisly aftermath of what happened to the Thistlegorm after the explosion, head to the middle of the ship. Here, you'll find the metal peeled back from the force of the blast, as if someone has taken a giant can opener to the hull. To show just how massive the blast was, it even managed to send a Bren carrier tank and a train flying, which can be seen to the side of the ship on the seabed. 2. USS Kwaki, Cayman Islands. The USS Kwaki is one of the most famous diving spots in the Caribbean. However, it was also a remarkable ship when it was sailing too. The vessel was classed as a submarine rescue ship, and it took its maiden voyage on July 10, 1945. It would remain in service for 49 years before being decommissioned in 1994. Most often, her main duty would be to accompany submarines on training exercises. However, she was also a part of a few historical events. In 1960, Kwaki provided assistance to the USS George Washington for the first successful launch of a Polaris missile from a submerged submarine. She also helped to rescue Cuban refugees in 1963, some of them being children, taking them to safety. The thing that the USS Kwaki is known for happened in 1986. The NASA Challenger disaster had just occurred, and officials were frantically searching for the black box from the spacecraft to help them figure out what had caused the tragedy. Out of all the ships sent out by the military and the Coast Guard, it was the Kwaki that managed to find it. The USS Kwaki may have ended up sitting in a US dockyard for the rest of her existence until a bid for the ship came in from the Cayman Islands. They wished to add it to one of their artificial reefs and could think of no better ship than the Kwaki to be the star of their subnautical show. The long process of getting the ship ready began, which meant removing any hazardous materials and making it more accessible to divers by opening up more spaces on the ship. 800 yards off of 7 Mile Beach on Grand Cayman, you can now find the Kitawaki's final resting spot after she was finally sunk in 2011. She's a popular attraction, with many divers exploring her interior and even taking selfies at the captain's wheel. With an abundance of marine life living on and in the vessel, a fabled history and 5 floors to explore, it's clear to see why this is a diver's paradise. 1. The Zenobia, Cyprus. Despite suffering from misfortune on her maiden voyage, the Zenobia now finds fame as one of the top dive sites in the world. She was built in Sweden in 1979, and the RO class ferry was set to make her first journey from Malmo all the way to Tartus in Syria. She was holding a whole range of cargo, many of them heavy vehicles such as forklifts and tractors, among other items. However, the Zenobia never made it to her final destination. When she was in the waters around Cyprus, she began to tilt to one side, which was a resulting problem with her ballasting system, which was distributing water unevenly. She was turned away from the port in Larnaca as they couldn't help. Shortly after 2 in the morning on June 7, 1980, the Zenobia sank about a mile offshore. Her cargo was worth a staggering $221,730,000. This led to a lot of conversation about the true nature of her capsizing. Many people thought that it might have been an attempt at insurance fraud, and the captain taking his own life less than a year after the incident did not help to allay suspicions. Either way, nowadays the Zenobia makes for an amazing diving spot. Not only can you see all of its many millions of dollars worth of cargo, but it's one of the best places in Cyprus to see all sorts of marine life that would normally not be at home there together, such as grouper, barracuda, tuna, turtle, and triggerfish. Which of these dive sites would you want to swim?
Number 4. The Graph Zeppelin. No German aircraft carrier took part in naval battles during World War II. There were several German battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and U-boats, but there were no flat tops. The Nazis planned to build 4 carriers, but only came close to completing one. Launched in December 1938 under the name KMS Graph Zeppelin, the ship was only 80% finished. It was destined to be scrap metal because of construction delays, an aircraft shortage, and heated arguments between Air Marshal Hermann Göring and the Navy. The keel was laid for the Zeppelin on December 26, 1936, fulfilling a promise made by Hitler to the German Navy. The Zeppelin weighed 19,250 tons and was 920 feet long. It had 1,760 crew members and could store 40 aircraft. When the ship was converted into floating storage for U-boat parts, the Germans had only partially installed the catapults. Hitler's views on the project were inconsistent, and he never gave his full support. Göring was also a strong critic and was angered by any challenge to his authority as commander of the Air Force. Regardless, Hitler gave Göring the go-ahead to start plans for the ship. In response, Göring proposed earlier models of the Messerschmitt 109 fighter and a redesign of the outdated Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber. The 2 aircraft were designed as land-based and were never meant for carrier operations. Even after improvements, they were inferior to their allies. Göring convinced Hitler the planes wouldn't be available until the end of 1944, knowing it would delay the carrier's construction. Göring's strategies were successful, and in 1943, production on the Graph Zeppelin stopped. By the time construction was cancelled, Admiral Karl Dönitz, a submariner, was commanding the German Navy, and all shipbuilding efforts were focused on creating new U-boats. Throughout the rest of the war, the Graph Zeppelin remained at its Stettin moorings and never saw combat. On April 25, 1945, the Zeppelin was scuttled in the low waters off Stettin, which is now Szczecin in Poland. This happened shortly before the Red Army claimed the city. It wasn't prepared for the junkyard, so the ship was refloated by the Russians and hauled to Leningrad full of looted goods and military components for the Soviet Union. The Soviets gave it the moniker PO-101 after its cargo was unloaded. The Graph Zeppelin had one more mission to do since the new owners wanted to repair and refit the ship as a new carrier, but this proved difficult. It was brought out to sea again on August 16, 1947, and Soviet ships and planes used it for target practice. Aerial bombs were dropped on its hangar, flight deck, and smokestack. Then, in an attempt to show how to sink an American-flagged carrier, aircraft and ships fired more rounds at it. The Graph continued to float after 24 strikes before being destroyed by torpedoes. The specifics of the Nazis' intended use of the vessel are now lost to history. The American, British, and Japanese warships gained experience in the years between wars, while the Germans had none. Even though the Zeppelin had cutting-edge features, its creator's lack of understanding was evident. The anti-aircraft weaponry was large but poorly placed on the starboard side, and the massive surface armament had limited value and unnecessary weight. For a fleet carrier designed to work alongside capital ships in the Atlantic commercial lanes, the radius of action was very limited. If the Graph Zeppelin had been there, support missions may have prevented the sinking of the Bismarck, Tiapet, and other naval conflicts. Since then, the Germans have never operated an aircraft carrier. The wreck was found over 260 feet below the surface, and the Polish Navy started a 2-day survey of the wreckage when it was discovered on July 12, 2006 to determine its historic identity. Using remote-controlled underwater robots, they came to the conclusion that it was indeed the Graph Zeppelin. Have you heard of Graph Zeppelin before this? Let us know in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 3. Project Blue Book. The United States Air Force conducted a systemic investigation of UFOs between March 1952 and December 17, 1969 under the codename Project Blue Book. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt served as the project's director. It was modeled after similar initiatives like Project Sign from 1947 and Project Grudge from 1948. The main objectives of Project Blue Book were to identify if UFOs posed a threat to national security and to conduct scientific analyses of UFO-related material. Numerous UFO reports were examined, but Project Blue Book was shut down in 1969 as a result of the Condon Report, which claimed that studying UFOs would not lead to any significant scientific breakthroughs. The following are the conclusions drawn from the Air Force's investigations. There was never any evidence presented to or discovered that sightings classified as unidentified represented technological advancements or principles that were outside the realm of scientific understanding. Likewise, there was never any evidence suggesting the sightings classified as unidentified were actually extraterrestrial vehicles. By the time Project Blue Book was finished, it had gathered nearly 12,618 UFO reports. It was determined that the majority of them were misidentifications of natural objects like clouds, stars, or airplanes. According to the National Spy Office, several of the claims could be explained by formerly top-secret reconnaissance aircraft U-2 and A-12. But despite in-depth research, 701 complaints were still labeled unexplainable. The names and other identifying details of witnesses have been removed from the UFO reports, which were stored and later made public thanks to the Freedom of Information Act. Number 2. Project 1794. The Department of Defense released 3 U.S. Navy videos in April 2020 that featured unidentified aerial phenomenon. The videos will probably continue the discussion about what is really out there, but in recent years, declassified documents have made the truth known regarding flying saucers and other objects. One of these so-called flying saucers were clearly from our world, not flown by little green aliens from a far-off planet. It was a component of Project 1794, an effort by the U.S. Air Force to create supersonic aircraft to shoot down Soviet bombers. The Air Force and Avro Aircraft, a Canadian company, worked together in the early 1950s to create an assault craft that was distinct from other jet fighters of that era. It was a vehicle shaped like a saucer instead of the typical wing and fuselage design. Theoretically, the vehicle would have a top speed between Mach 3 and Mach 4, a vertical ceiling beyond 100,000 feet, and a potential range of 1,000 nautical miles. It would use takeoff and landing capabilities, negating the need for runways, and could potentially be deployed almost anywhere according to declassified papers. Aside from being circular, the design would have included built-in stealth features as well. Simply put, it would truly have been something out of this world. The records from the Aeronautical Systems Division of the United States Air Force were made available by the United States National Archives in September 2012. The National Archives claimed that these cutaways have a significant similarity to the flying saucers from popular science fiction films published during the years these reports were made, 1956 and 1957. The issue to raise is whether the AVO Project 1794 was one of the UFOs individuals claimed to have seen in the 1950s. That's doubtful, though. The vehicle in question most likely wasn't capable of what its creators intended. One has to consider the VZ-9 Avro car, a variant saucer that was financed by the U.S. Army, which was looking for a low-flying VTOL plane. The initial specifications for a workable ceiling of 10,000 feet and a top speed of 300 miles per hour. Despite all attempts, the craft could only fly a few feet off the ground at maximum speed of 35 miles per hour. Wind tunnel testing proved the aircraft was aerodynamically unstable and lacked enough control for high-speed flights. The Avro car demonstrated uncontrollable pitch and roll motions while flying higher than 3 feet off the ground. The Army's Avro car was more of a slow-moving hovercraft than a high-flying saucer. After the project was scrapped in 1961, the Canadian company shut its doors a year later. One of the Avro car prototypes is now on exhibit at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The U.S. military's attempts to create a flying saucer went horribly wrong. But whether or not the real flying saucers are out there, well, we'll have to wait and see. Number 1. Project Habakuk. A secret that once had the potential to alter the outcome of World War II remains hidden under Canada's Lake Patricia. The British had a strange idea: build aircraft carriers out of massive icebergs to gain the upper hand against German U-boats. After all, they were plentiful, free, and thought to be unsinkable. Even though it seemed crazy, Winston Churchill gave his blessing to the project. Parts of a prototype were created and tested at the lake over the course of 4 months and are still there 50 feet below the surface. Project Habakuk lives on even though the ice melted. Geoffrey Pike, a scientist working for the British War Office in 1942, attempted to come up with a plan to defend Allied ships in the U-boat Alley, a region of the Atlantic Ocean where Nazi submarines ruled and were out of reach for Allied fighter planes. He believed it would make sense to drag pieces of Arctic ice south so planes could land. This would also save on other important building materials. The International Ice Patrol, which was created to destroy icebergs after the Titanic sank in 1912, reported that breaking them up wasn't easy, even with torpedoes and incendiary bombs. At the time, ice was thought to be practically unsinkable. The prophet Habakuk, who's quoted in the Bible saying, "Be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told," inspired Pike to name his ambitious design HMS Habakuk, which is a misspelling of the old prophet's name. It was as difficult as it sounds to build a battleship out of ice. Since icebergs are 90% buried in the ocean, they would need to have about 500 feet of room above the water to launch aircraft from them. It would be almost impossible to operate such a vessel. Additionally, icebergs' tops melt, which would be problematic for aircraft trying to refuel. Also, a flight deck made of another material was needed for proper takeoff and landings. Because of this, they chose to create a ship with an ice hull that was constructed like a regular vessel and had to be kept frozen using a refrigeration system. The intended warship would be the biggest ever constructed, measuring 2,000 feet long and 200 feet wide, more than twice the size of the Titanic, with room for 300 planes. Churchill would have a secret weapon against the U-boats thanks to this ship, which could travel at a pace of 7 knots and take on waves up to 50 feet high. On December 4, 1942, he gave the proposal his approval in a note marked "Most Secret." He requested that a prototype be made. Now that Britain needed ice, it went to Canada for help. The National Research Council was given the task of conducting the experiment, and C.J. Mackenzie, who was in charge, referred to the plan simply as another of those mad, wild schemes. The test was carried out at Lake Patricia in Alberta's Jasper National Park. Nothing about it was ever disclosed to the laborers. They dubbed it Noah's Ark. Despite not knowing what it was, they were aware that it was something related to the war effort. The building of a 60-foot-long prototype ship began in 1943. The walls and flooring were made of wood, tar, refrigeration pipes, and a piece of lake ice. The refrigeration pipe wrapped around it like a rib cage, and the structure resembled a large shoebox with a giant ice cube in the center. The vessel was given a roof to shield it from the weather and give the impression that it was just a boathouse. The prototype was successful, but not easy. Some of the piping was broken upon arrival, so air was pumped through the cooling system instead of water. A superior construction material called picrete from pike and concrete was produced during this time, which meant adding wood pulp to the ice mix. Unfortunately, it wasn't included in the prototype since making it in the massive amounts required for the Habakuk was impractical. The test revealed that the ice ship was more real than imagined, but the project started to sink by the middle of 1943. A combination of 3 things led to its downfall. First, there was no need for floating aerodomes since Iceland could be utilized as a permanent base in the North Atlantic. Secondly, longer range and newer aircraft were made. Finally, the introduction of cinemetric radar enabled more precise tracking of U-boats. The Allies were beginning to gain the upper hand in the war. These 3 factors rendered it useless before it was ever finished. It was feasible, but not on the scale Churchill desired. The building could have been made, but its implementation would have been difficult. All testing in Canada was stopped in June 1943, and Churchill was notified. After the project was cancelled, the refrigerated equipment was taken out and the model was left in place before sinking down into the lake. Thanks for watching. Which one of these military projects do you find most strange or interesting? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.